Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So, we are very excited today because we are coming to the podcast with a completely new topic, new to our listeners, but definitely not something that is new to Lily. So, we are going to be talking a lot about our connection with the earth today. And this is something that is a huge part of Lily's work. So, for those listening, many of you probably know, but Lily is an energy healer and she's also an earth guide. And so, a lot of her work has been working to reestablish and help her clients reestablish their connection with earth and what that looks like. And just in the way that I've witnessed her and how her business is evolving, this has been a huge part of what she's stepping into in new ways in her business. And so we're going to talk about a lot of that and also about her connection with the earth and what that has looked like. So, Lily, let's start there. Let's start with your background with the earth, where your connection with the earth really started, and how you got into doing the work that you do with Gaia, with the earth, and go from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Jess. So, yeah, my background with the environmental earth space started when I was very young. So, my mom works in the environmental space, and I really grew up just really surrounded by nature in a lot of different ways, like through the school that I went to when I was a kid, but also just, family values really. So like my family really valued the outdoors and just nature in general, animals as well. We always were my childhood we had like a bunch of situations where rescued some bunnies or rescued a crow, like things like that really I think were impactful and important in my growing up kind of experience. And I always felt like a very deep, profound connection with with nature, with Gaia, with the planet. And I think that, yeah, from a really young age, my favorite movie was Pocahontas, still is my all-time favorite Disney movie. And I'll say that, my emotions really led me in a lot of ways when I was thinking about this episode and kind of how I wanted to share my origins with my professional choice in terms of career. It really came from this deep emotional place. And I always felt this really strong, yeah, deep emotion for the planet, for protection of the planet, specifically for protection of animals as well. And within me, even from a very young age, I could feel this, many different types of emotions like gratitude and appreciation and love, like deep love for the planet, but also this fierceness, like this almost sacred rage, like as a child, around ways that the earth had been tampered with or extracted, and ways that there have been injustices when it comes to the way animals are treated, and all of these kind of interrelating topics related to the earth. And so honestly, it was really my emotional space that led me in the direction of my career. And as I grew up and was looking at different options in terms of like, what do you want to do when you grow up, and what do you want to be, and what do you want to study in college, I pretty much knew from the very beginning that I wanted to do earth work and I wanted to be in the environmental space. I had a very brief period of time when I thought I was going to be like a doctor or something in the medical field.
Mhm.
And is the path not taken? um, so I did actually give it a little bit of a try. I volunteered at a hospital for a summer, and to be honest, there was things that I really liked about it. Like I liked how organized it was, and I liked how um, kind of like everything's kind of like contained. There's a lot of protocols. There's a lot of like, I don't know if safety is the right word, but it's pretty methodical. There's a lot of organization there. And I think that in itself was like a little bit appealing to me, but ultimately what turned me off was the fact that it was indoors. I was in a building And I was like, no, I can't. Like the lights, the space, it was the environment that I was like, no. And also, other things about it that just weren't in full resonance. But I kind of quickly reoriented back to my original path, original desire to do environmental work. And that led me to, pursuing that in the academic world in the coming years, like through my college degrees.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. When you said the fact that it was indoors, I was just like, that does not surprise me at all. And so that's so fascinating. I also think it's really beautiful that you were able to let your emotions and your experiences as a child like guide you into where you are today, and especially into the work that your field of study in college, because I think so many times like we can feel lost in that sense. So I'm really, really, I don't know, it's just really inspiring that you allowed that to be your guide. And so just so people have a little bit more of a background, let them know like what you studied in college, because I feel like this totally adds to the quality of your work.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm excited to share this. And I feel like this is kind of like little known about me because I don't share it like in my business space. And people close to me are always like, why don't you share that? And I don't know why I haven't, I guess, but maybe I'll start now that I'm kind of bringing it to the podcast. But yeah, so I went to school for my undergraduate in Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. And I got a degree in geoscience, which is basically like an environmental science, but it was focused on Earth systems. So it was basically like the systems and processes of the Earth. So like how the Earth was formed, how it changes, how it morphs. Like it's very big picture, but also I would say like specific in terms of the topic. It's really about processes when it comes to change within the Earth, thinking about like tectonic plates, but also kind of like those formational changes when we think about Earth kind of change over time. But it also included a lot of different things. Like it included astronomy. So we took astronomy. There was different classes like that had field work associated. So we would go out and we would identify rocks. So there's a lot of geology situations there that we did. We did a lot of like field work and looking at different rock formations. I actually went to Costa Rica in my final year. I think it was my final year of my undergrad. I went to Costa Rica and we looked at volcanoes. And we also just kind of looked at how the whole Costa Rican landscape was created and built, and kind of the different geological processes that go along with being such an active volcanic place. So that was like very different from where I grew up in Pennsylvania. So it was really interesting for me to see how it was different there. And, obviously we got to do more than that too. Just got into the culture of Costa Rica and all of that. And even like the ecological parts of it, which I was always really fascinated by too. So we did like different rainforest tours and got to see different species, which I loved. And that was not really a focus in my degree, to be honest. And I was always kind of sad about that. I always wanted more of a wildlife focus or like an ecological focus, but that just never really happened. And I chose that major because I thought it would give me the strongest kind of foundation to stand on in terms of moving forward into more like specific avenues of that career space. And I think it did. So I moved on to my master's degree, which I came out to Idaho for. I'm still in Idaho now. And again, I pursued an environmental related degree. So I got a master's in, it's called Natural Resources and Society. So this is where I brought people into the picture, which I always have had mixed feelings about. I'll get into that later. But I'm a social scientist. And so like that's my title. And I study people's interactions with natural resources, and I study how people interact with the land and interact with the earth. And it's interesting how that all came to be, right? Because now I'm like doing all of this in my business space where I'm working directly with people, whereas before I was working only with the earth space. But now I've like really brought into cohesion, society, earth, connection. So in my current in my degree with in my master's degree, it was really challenging. Like it was really hard. I would say primarily because of the pace of the work. Like it was like a 2-year sprint. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I had definitely a burnout episode after that experience in my master's. And that brought me more into the healing space. However, I never lost touch with what I studied and what I, um, you know, got out of that degree, which was people's perceptions of the natural world in a lot of ways. And I did a lot of research on that. So I would go out and I would talk to people about their perceptions on different environmental qualities, like such as drought or other kind of environmental things that are happening, such as climate change. Like, hey, what do you think about climate change? How do you perceive that? How are you working with that? As I often talk to people who had a livelihood connected with the land. So ranchers, farmers, people of that nature. So I got to know how people who work really intimately with the land navigate these different environmental issues, while also kind of like building my understanding of how people in general like connect with the landscape. And, obviously this is site specific, so it's local to where I am here in Idaho. So people's interactions with the land will be different based on where they are on the earth and what they do. But this was kind of my experience, or like immersion into that, was like in this rural kind of landscape in Idaho, where there is a lot of place-based sustenance living, which is like basically living off the land. So that was kind of my experience with my degrees and kind of what they added to my understanding of the earth. And it, more in this academic, like streamlined sense, which I think varied. It kind of took me away in some ways from like that emotional connection, but there was often times in my degree where I would like get glimpses of that and being like, okay, yeah, this is why I do what I do. Like, this is why I love what I do. So it was woven in, even in this more like kind of like streamlined academic space.
Yeah. And so because I totally agree with earlier when you were like, yeah, people in my life are like, why don't you talk about this more? Because I've learned so much from you in this sense. And you have blown me away in certain things, like certain experiences with regards to this background that you have in studying the earth. And one example of that is when you were in Sedona, and Sedona's in the desert. I really want to share this. So Sedona is in the desert, okay, Arizona. And Lily was there by herself. She was doing a solo retreat. She kind of talked to that about that in her Arizona episode a little bit, or the Arizona episode. And she was tuning in and she sent me a message and she was like, I immediately, right when I got here, I felt like so much mermaid energy and so much like underwater energy. And I was just like, why am I feeling mermaid energy? I'm in the desert. And then she like looked at the rocks and she was like, huh, those rocks show signs of having been underwater. And she knew this from her degree and from her studies of the earth. And she was like, okay, and then she looked it up and Sedona was in fact underwater way back when. And I was just like blown away by this because it is a prime example of how your background, which as you mentioned, really has established this foundation for you, and almost it like marrying with your intuitive gifts. And so I would love to hear where you are with that and what that's looking like for you, and if you feel called to share anything that's, I don't know, very important around that and how that's evolving.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for that compliment. It makes me feel good. And, it's nice to use your degrees and be like, this is helping me in the real world. Like, yes, like I think most of us who have been to college are like hoping that that's the case, like after we leave college. And so in those instances where that geology class came in claiming clutch, it was in Arizona, where there are a ton of rocks and I could see kind of what was going on geologically there. So Yeah, Jess is right. So I went to Arizona, and if you listen to the Arizona episode, you'll know a little bit more about that trip. But basically, the rocks that I was seeing were like weathered by water. And you can tell when a rock is like weathered by water because it has imprints of water. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it'll be really smooth, and there will be like circular motions or even like spirals within the rocks, because it's just, you can tell it's just been worn and weathered by water. And water is actually the strongest force that's like exists on the planet, because it will its nature of being so flexible actually allows it to be like the most powerful. And so, rivers can cut through canyons, rivers can cut through mountains. That's why we have canyons and valleys, is because rivers cut through them, because water is forming the landscape in so many ways. So, like, water is very formative. And I think that can be, maybe something that people don't fully, think about when they think about water, just because water is just so malleable and so flowing, but it's very, very powerful. But yeah, I truly do feel like that Arizona trip really solidified this, what you said, Jess, around like, okay, like that degree was really important in establishing a foundation for me. And like, I even had an experience when I was at the Grand Canyon, where I was like walking along the rim of the Grand Canyon, and basically like the Grand Canyon, the park in of itself, like, kind of teaches you how the Grand Canyon was formed, which was formed by a river. But it also kind of moves you through the different layers of the rock, because the canyon is just formed with like huge layers of rock. It just looks like a big sandwich. And so it was kind of like another like reminiscent kind of moment for me, because I've been out of school for like 4 years now. And yeah, it was just interesting to be like, oh yeah, I know this. And yeah, the way that the earth is formed is like something that's familiar to me. And I feel like that's really valuable in the work that I do now, because yes, you're right. Most of my work is now kind of in the more spiritual realm when it comes to working with the earth, but it's all interwoven. And it's like the more we understand something from many different angles, like the more things will click in. It's like when you do a card pull and you pull one card, and it's like, yeah, like, okay, I know what that means. Like, that means something to me, and that might be great. But then if you pull like another card, there's like another layer or like perspective that you can like take, And so that's the way that I kind of view my academic background paired with my intuitive kind of like earth connection space that I work in now in my business, because it's not really one without the other. And I think that, yeah, I think it does provide, I don't want to say like credibility, but like it does in a way, because I really have like devoted myself to this like body of work in ways that most people don't know or like don't see. So yeah, I do feel I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I did. And even though I've taken kind of a route in my business that isn't necessarily like utilizing my degree in like everyday ways, it still has, it's like, it feels like my like internship with the earth, and like these like different parts of it have all been kind of like part of just how I operate now. So nothing's ever, wasted, I don't think. So, and I still use my degree as well. Like, I still have a career like track that is, the social science natural resource based social science work. And I still do that as well. So it's very tangible for me in terms of like tapping back into that side of my knowledge. And I do that all the time as well. And so I think after my degree ended, I started to, go through my own spiritual journey and remember some of these deep passions that I felt to the earth, that with the earth, with Gaia, still kind of playing with my terminology there, but some of these deeper passions and like deeper soul feelings that I kind of had tapped out of when I was in the academic like learning space, but now through my like spiritual awakening process and through my healing, really my body healing, my body kind of led me back to the earth in a more spiritual sense. So I never really left my work with the earth, but I definitely didn't have the same kind of energetic, emotional, spiritual tie my whole life as I do now and when I was a child. So bringing that back in through my business, but also through my own just healing journey, really has been so rewarding for me and has felt so right, really right.
Okay. So I would love to go there to like your passions within it and like that connection point specifically, because what I am so curious about is, I guess we can start like with because a lot of the work that you do is like reconnecting people to the earth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I really want to know more. And I'm sure, like also guiding listeners there is, what does reconnecting with the earth look like? So what does that look like for you, which you kind of alluded to was with your body, but I'd love to hear more about what that looks like in your everyday and what that is experienced, how that's experienced for you. And then yeah, let's just start there because I have other questions as well.
Okay. Yeah, these are really great questions, Jess. Thank you. Yeah, so I do. I work a lot with connecting people to the earth in everyday ways, but also in like a deeply profound, like spiritual sense. And so I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of it? Like what you were asking in terms of like how, I think it was like, how does that like connection kind of like play into my work? Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So you had mentioned that within the work that you're doing now, you found that passion again in that connection with the earth. And so I was wanting to dive into that passion point.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so when I was little, as I've kind of alluded to before, and I didn't know this when I was little, but I had like this deep like sacred rage around how the earth has been treated. And I didn't know that, as a child, I have sacred, like that's not something we think, but like that was very like it was like this uncontrollable well of like emotion where I would just like it would like come up through me and I would just like cry and I would be like processing it. And again, like that's what led me down this path because that is something when you feel that, and like this, Jess, because like you are really connected to your emotional experience as well. That's something that like cannot be denied, and so I have always thought in my mind, and I actually had this really profound moment when I was hiking by myself like a couple of years ago when I first like started my business, had this really profound moment where I was like, this, like my connection to the planet, like my connection to the earth will always be at the forefront of like what I do. And as long as that's true, then like I can't go wrong. And at that point, I was really struggling because I was like moving into the energy healing space and I was doing healings with people, not that I'm like healing them, but I was facilitating these healing spaces with people. And people it's very different working with people than working with the earth. Earth is very easy to work with. People are not so easy to work with. And I mean, I love my clients. I love my clients. You guys are great, but there's a difference because there's a lot of baggage with people. There's a lot of karma, emotions. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of responsibility as well. With the earth, my passion was always there. I always felt so held by her, and it was like I never had to prove anything. Like I never had to do anything. Like I was always just there doing my work with her in whatever conscious or subconscious way that was. And so when it comes to like the specific kind of like passions that I started to develop like as a child, it was really around animals. That was like a really big one for me, especially like injustices, but not in the kind of like domestic sense, like more in the sense of like wildlife and like extinction of species and like lack of connection between habitats. So like one thing that I really started to love was this idea of like how can we reconnect habitats like all across the planet, all across the landscape to allow animals to continue to migrate and do what they need to do in terms of moving across the landscape. Because what we've done is we've put in a lot of roads and fences that kind of stop any kind of migration. And so certain species need to migrate and they can't. And for some reason that really spoke to me. I think it has to do with like this feeling of like can't go home, or like can't travel, like can't do what you need to do. And like that speaks to me personally because that's really important to me. And so I could really feel that, like I can, like it's coming. I can like feel it like coming up in me. Like it's a very strong pull. But that is definitely something that was kind of like a pinpoint when it came to like passions. But then also I'll speak to the movie Pocahontas. Something that really, really was passionate, filled me in so many ways, was this reverence for the earth and this indigenous kind of connection to the planet. Yeah. And the premise of the movie, if you haven't seen it, is basically like the white settlers like come into the indigenous land, and the white settlers like try to like teach the indigenous like how to live better. And Pocahontas basically shares that like that they don't need to be taught, like they don't need to be taught, like they have this deep love and reverence for the earth that is so anchoring for the human collective. And I think that we've lost that in so many ways. And so bringing that back into the picture hasn't been another really, really big passion point for me. But on a very much like a spiritual, like collective level, like in a way that isn't necessarily about like recycling, although like I do that. Like I do all of those things that are like more tangible that I can like talk to people about. But what I really feel like my journey is walking in that way and having people see me really connected and be like, how do I do that? And that only comes from embodiment for me. And so for me, it's never been so much about teaching like the nitty gritty of how to be more sustainable, but it has been modeling a deep connection and reverence for the earth and my relationship with her. Like modeling my relationship has been, feels to me like one of the most passionate things, and something that feels like really on purpose for me.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, because I feel like just like as you were speaking, about Pocahontas, because I've seen it as well, and just, seeing how the indigenous people, they live and work with the earth. And like something that you've shared with me is that some of the most spiritual people that you've met are farmers, because like but they're spiritual in a very different way. They're spiritual in the way that they're so deeply connected to the earth. They work with the earth, they work with the seasons. And like, this is something that I think that is one of the most profound things you've ever said to me, because I kind of was like, it like stopped me in my tracks a bit. Like I was like, whoa, like that is something I've never thought about, because, we look at spirituality and we see it very new agey, and we see it very up, up in the clouds. And I think a lot of the times we don't see the groundedness of it. And I feel like that's a lot of like the work that you're here to do, is that groundedness. And so what I really like want to hear more of is like, and I know you were talking more about that embodiment piece, because it's like, as humans, this is something that I've been thinking about actually all week, because, I've known that we were going to record this episode, and this is something that is actually, God, I'm getting like emotional. Okay. The earth, for me, like I feel this really deeply as well. Like how much we've hurt her. And like it hurts me to see like the food industry, not only because, we've hurt the earth, but also animals, and then fashion, and just like so many ways that we live, like the littlest things, like, when I use a paper towel, I don't think about like where it's going. And these are just like so many things that we as humans, I feel like we're a bit ignorant to the ways in which industrialism and the ways in which, we've evolved as a society, which is very important. We've had to evolve. But I think it's like this piece of like, how can we come into that connection of reverence to the earth kind of like beyond that, you know, what you mentioned. We try to recycle, we try to do these things that are sustainable. And I guess like from your experience, like what does that look like for you in the way that you reconnect, in the way that you have and embody that respect for the earth? Like, can you share more about like what that looks like for you?
Yes. Yes, I can. And yeah, it is like a really deep, there's a lot that I think we can process for her. And I think we're both kind of on that path in a way. Um, and for ourselves, you know. But yeah, in terms of building the respect, I remember when I was like, okay, I need to bring more of the earth stuff into my actual business. I remember like I was with a tree and like channeling, okay, like what does my audience need to know about like how to connect with the earth more, you know? And the first thing that, oh man, the first thing that came through was just respect. It's like she doesn't want anything from you. Like she doesn't need you to give her anything. It's just respect. And it's like any relationship, that's like the first thing. It's not like we have to, yeah, it's like it's not about doing. It's about respect. And that will change everything. Like that in and of itself will change your actions, will change how you treat the planet. Like it will change the collective. And the lack of respect, the disposableness that we think is her, that is what's the most damaging. And so it is a paradigm shift. And I believe that that's why I was pulled to the social science realm, because I needed to talk to people and I needed to be with people. I didn't need to just be kind of like doing conservation projects with just animals. Like I needed, because I know that I'm here to make change in this way. And so starting with the respect, and I mean, if you're listening and you know, you're new to this, I feel like the earth just being like, so I feel Gaia, and it's just like she's very warm. Like she's very like open and smiling and warm, and like she's like, this isn't scary. Like this is just respect. This is, and here's the thing too. So if we think about, you know, spiritual path, when we think about, okay, what does it mean to be on the spiritual path and we're ascending, you know, XYZ. And if you kind of fall into that camp of thinking where we're all kind of like ascending, right? The only way that we get to ascend through the spirit, like in a spiritual way, through the human body, is to have a place to do that. And I was reading a book recently, and it really spoke to me the way that they put this. They were saying how, you know, Gaia, Mother Earth, has willingly volunteered to do this, you know, to host us, you know. And like how amazing is that, you know, just to think about it from that perspective. Like she's a willing host, and she's also just asking for your respect. And it's like any relationship, any relationship. And like how would you, I'm like reining in the emotions as they like wave through me. But how would you treat a friend? How would you treat your partner? How would you treat your family? And it does really come back to that simplicity.
Yeah, I completely agree in what you said, where it's like, I feel like once you develop that respect, it will just shift the way that you do act toward the earth, toward Gaia. And and I think that that is it's not as tangible, but it is in the sense of it's like the underlying root of the tangible things. And because I feel like we could talk about, you know, where do we start to be sustainable? But like, I feel like that's like not the scope of your work. Like, the scope of your work is like so much deeper, and
Mhm.
it's so much more like rooted in the energetics and rooted in that energetic connection, which I think can be like sometimes hard for people to grasp. But, um, I think it's huge, and I'm really curious about, you know, in your experience, has that looked really different from person to person and working with people?
Yeah, I think so. And you're right. Like for some reason, I was never drawn to like the sustainability space. And I think it was just because it's like, that's really, it just all comes down to purpose and mission. Like that's all. Like nothing's better or worse. Like there are great people working in this sustainability space and that's their job. And I'm like, okay, great. Tell me what to do. You know what I mean? But like my space is, yeah, like the deep energetic roots of why we as a collective have disgraced her in like so many ways through our actions and through like our belief systems that have perpetuated through generations, but that when we go back far enough like are pure. There's definitely this ancestral piece that I work with as well, when it comes to healing, the healing space. So within my business and working with individuals, but also with the earth, there's an ancestral tie that I have there as well as an indigenous one. And so yeah, I think it does really, in terms of like embracing your connection with the planet, it does really come down to the individualness. And, don't let me stop you from being sustainable. I certainly am. And, I consider those things in the choices that I make for sure. Like I do. And, my partner loves to use paper plates and I don't stop him from using paper plates. I try to use as few as I can, but some days I use one and it is what it is. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of reminding me of when you were saying that you use the cascade. It's kind of reminding me of that. If you guys were listening to that episode, you'll know what I'm talking about. But Jess uses Cascade for her dishwasher, and we've determined that that's okay.
I mean, like, you have to find balance. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And then that's kind of where I was thinking too, is like the world and society has become, we had the Industrial Revolution and we've only evolved more and more from there. And that's also based on, as humanity has grown, like we've had to develop systems to like feed humanity, to keep up with humanity. Unfortunately, a lot of those systems are harming the earth. But it does kind of go into, yeah, that play of like, we're also living in this really evolved time. Do you know what I mean? And so, like we have to be in our reality, but also it's like, how can we at the same time come back to that reverence, come back to that respect? And so I feel like it's finding that and working with that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I think that's just an observation that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah. No, yeah, it is. It is about finding it's about finding your balance. We're not self-sacrificing here. That's not the point. But I just want, if you're listening, and I'm thinking about this too, it's like, what actually influences you? Is it someone like telling you what to do? Or is it witnessing someone have a magical, profoundly deep experience in a spiritual way? Like for me, it's the second one. When I witness someone in their spiritual practice, I have like a sense of awe, and like I have a sense of like, wow, like that's profound and I feel inspired by that. And so I feel like that's what I'm here to provide in terms of, sharing my experiences with the earth and with Gaia, but just walking it, and the thing that I've told Jess is like, it's funny because this is it's the bedrock of who I am in so many ways and my purpose and passion and mission, but I often don't talk about it. And for some reason, I feel like often there's more said through what people witness. And that isn't coming from like, I'm not doing that intentionally, but like there's something about me just being in my way, with the earth and the way that I interact with her and being able to be witnessed in that. And sharing here on the podcast is like, so it inspires me so much. It makes me so excited to like actually put words to it, because it is like more difficult for me to put words to this, because again, like I'm not drawn to teaching about sustainability, or like teaching how to like, you know, live a more, you know, environmentally conscious life. Like I'm not really drawn to doing those things. So finding a medium, has been kind of a challenge. And I think there's also a lot of vulnerability in it for me. And I haven't really touched on this yet, but there's a lot of vulnerability that I have around this connection that I do, because I was made fun of for it, like for quite some time, when I was younger. And, again, that was just part of the journey, I think, of like me pushing away and then coming back. And so, yeah, I'm grateful to have the space to share today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm grateful that you are sharing. And because it is something like going back to that embodiment piece, you know, ever since like you have come into my life, you have influenced me to want to reconnect to nature, because as someone, like I always joke, I'm a city girl and we know that, right? Like Lily and I have talked about this too. It's so funny because like we're so close and we share so many of the same values and beliefs, but we are so different in the way that we live. And that comes from, you know, me, I'm a more city urban vibe, and Lily is much more like rural in nature. And what I've really taken away from like witnessing you in that, especially like visiting you and whatnot, is just this like, it is like a level of it's like groundedness. Like it's a very grounded energy. Like being in your energy is very, you're very, it's very grounded. And I think that that is also something that you bring, you know, in the way that you share on your stories. And, you know, you do give glimpses into when you're out in nature. And I think that it kind of is hard to talk about, because I know what you're saying in the embodiment piece. Like it's hard for you to like talk about it. And, but like give listeners insight into like the way that you do go out in nature and like what that looks like for you. Because I think that that's a big part of your life that people don't fully get to see. And the only reason why I say that is because I know it's a big part of your life, and you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so just speak on that a little bit more, like let them hear it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's huge. And here's the thing, I never take my phone. Like, that's the dilemma, right? Like, I don't have the same connection when I have my phone in my hand. And so I'm like, do I sacrifice that? And the answer is usually no. So yeah, every day, I'll just share a little bit about my practice. So every day, I, I wake up, I have breakfast, do what I shower, whatever, and then I go on my walk. And when I say like I go on my walk, like I do walk, like I walk to a park near my house, or like if I'm staying, like I'm staying in a different place today, so I'll like go out in the woods. But I'll go out and then I'll like give myself space there. So although getting some motion in is like important for me, when it comes to like my connection, I usually need to really pause. And so I'll pause like in nature, connected with nature, and I will just feel her. Like one thing that I think that we get wrong in the spiritual space is like all the protections that we put up, which is great. Like, you know how many messages I've received around protections as like a Pisces, very empathetic, those kinds of things. But that when you're in nature, you can let your protections down, because that's how she can like enter into your field and heart. And when you are in like a natural space, she will also want to like, the space around you will want to kind of like recalibrate you to your own authenticity, your own self, but you have to allow it. So like you have to like be like, okay, I'm letting down my protection for a little bit, like I'm letting down my barriers and like opening. There's this thing of like opening, and usually you just have to let go of our phones to do that, because most of my connection with Gaia is through the felt sense. Like, yes, I'll get visuals, but like most of my connection with her is very felt. And so I would say that, everyone's going to have their different connections, but the felt sense is really a strong one for me. So I like to go out, open my heart, feel her, connect to her heart. And like, that's when I feel like the unified, like force, like life force. And like, that is just a feeling that is just so nourishing, it's also, it's just, I can't live without it at this point. It would just be, I I don't know. I feel like my field would just like slowly like collapse on me. It's just like this expansiveness that I feel with her. Um, and then, it changes. Like when I'm in a really, when I'm feeling down, like when I'm struggling, like I go to her for comfort. Like 100% I go to her for comfort. And she is always there for me. And so, uh, I feel the most sense of reliability with her. And one thing that I love to do as much as I possibly can is like lay my whole body on the earth. And this is a practice I started when I was healing. And I was like, I don't know why, but I have this like very strong desire to ground. And I started learning about grounding. But at first I didn't know anything about grounding. And so I would just lay my whole body on the earth and I would just receive. And somehow it made me feel better. And I started to catch on. Like I was like, okay, this is helping. And so through that, like it was a replenishment of my own body, but in a way I'd never experienced before. And so now I continue to do that. And some days I feel like I really need to be recharged. And so I'll go out and I'll do that. And then other days I feel like I can do like more work with her in terms of just like being, or if there's something that I want to tune into, like sometimes I'll do that. Something that I've been doing more so is connecting to different lands that I'm not on. So connecting to like different parts of the US or like different parts of the world to receive from those areas too. And just feel into the resonance that I have with those places while I'm not there. And it's been really interesting. Like I feel quite transported. So I have to really ground in after that. So that's kind of a practice that I've started to get a little bit more familiar with. I've just been planning some travel this coming year, and this was brought to my awareness by a mentor of mine. She was like, hey, you should try this. And I was like, okay. And so I have, and it's been really interesting so far. So that's a couple of the things that I do kind of like on a daily basis. But mostly it's just the being. Like I allow myself to really be. And I often have a lot of emotional release when I'm in nature, more so than I do anywhere else. And I think that I am releasing things for her, but releasing things for me too. And recently it's felt like my emotional connection with her has been kind of like supercharged. Like it's been like almost every time I go out, I'm just like, ooh, like waves and waves. And yeah, I'm not like totally sure what's mine, what's hers, but like, or what's the earth, what's the, you know what I mean? Those kinds of things are always considerations, but it's not always like this like deep grief that I feel. Sometimes it's just this like deep love and like connection with my soul. So like that's really where I connect with my soul is in nature. Like that's where my soul connection happens.
Wow. I loved too the piece that you said when you go out, and because this was going to be one of my questions is like what advice would you give people when they're connecting with the earth, because I do feel like it is very individualized in that sense. And you mentioned, just like letting all your guards down, and that's how you let her in. And the second you said that, I was like, whoa, received. And I feel like that is so universal. Like I feel like everybody can practice that and almost like, start there with it, especially if, if you are like me and you live in a city and you're not as connected to or you don't feel as connected to nature. I mean, there are so many ways. It's like you have to go outside, you know what I mean? There are so many ways that you can connect in just the littlest of ways. And so I think that that's really a key piece as well, is meeting yourself where you're at and starting there. And then I'm also just really curious about, a lot of the work that a lot of what you studied, a lot of the work that you've kind of looked into and done is people's perspectives on the natural world and our relationship with the natural world. And so I'm just curious if you feel like you are being called in a specific direction with that.
Hmm. Like, do you mean like working with a certain group of people, or like?
Certain group of people, or like I'm really curious if you feel, I mean, I guess it could be more touching on the energetic component like we've talked about, but I'm really curious just kind of like about your perspective and where you feel called in terms of, all the ways that we are as humans being destructive to the earth. For instance, when it comes to like what I mentioned earlier, the food system, fashion industry. There's so many other things that I just can't think of off the top of my head, but are there any pockets within that you feel specifically called to as a part of your mission?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, before I touch on that, I just think like just honing in that like letting down your guard again, like for the listeners, like that will really open your connection. Like there's just something about that really, and my biggest challenge too was like getting out of my head, like allowing my thoughts to like coalesce, to like distill, and like allowing the emotion to arise. So like when we're in our heads, like it's just really hard to like connect with nature, but it's like the most important thing to like let her in is just being like surrendering it for a moment. So I just wanted to touch on that quickly. But secondly, yes, I do. So there are, what I've talked about with the energetics, I definitely feel pulled to like, yeah, like be a leader in the way of like how I operate when it comes to the planet, but also just like transmitting my reverence to her. Like someone actually received that from me the other day, and I could feel that they received that from me, and they like let me know. And it wasn't something that I wasn't teaching. I was just experiencing something like really intense that happened. So that piece, and there's a cognitive thing about that too, like there is like some words that I share with my clients around this as well. Like I can show people in a more tangible sense, like kind of what I've done in this podcast in terms of like how I connect and like how they can connect, but yeah, the transmission part for sure. So with the energetics, I do feel like, again, on the energetic side, I feel like there's something with the ancestral piece for me that's going to be called up in terms of, indigenous connection, but maybe even just the ancestral piece of this problem. Really, it is a problem, is I think somewhere where I can shine in a way. I'm not sure what that will look like yet. And then on the more tangible side, I do feel really called to conservation specifically. So doing different conservation projects. I'm trying to think if there's like an example I can give. But yeah, like again, like saving landscapes from development, allowing certain landscapes to be connected. Like connecting a landscape in and of itself is like, basically it reminds me of like the nervous system of the earth. So like how do we connect our own, like this coherence that we feel like within our bodies when our nervous systems are regulated, like that can also be applied to the earth and like the landscape. So it's like, how can we invite like more coherence in the landscape, like while we're still a part of it? It's not like we just like go live on the moon, it's that this like living in cohesion with the earth is definitely calling me. And I feel like in that specific, well, kind of in addition to that, it's the conservation piece. So again, like what that actually, like what living in cohesion actually looks like is usually doing conservation projects and like restoring different parts of the planet. Like I'm looking at this river right now on this painting, and one of the ways that we can like restore different lands is by doing restoration projects like on waterways specifically, because waterways are really important. It's like the blood of the earth. And so if we can restore waterways in big ways so that they're not polluted, they're really healthy, they can support the entire like landscape that's like connected to that waterway. So yeah, restoration is another kind of piece of the conservation puzzle that I've been considering. And then something that has popped up in my awareness kind of recently is ecological design, which I'm like really excited about this potential for me in like some capacity is basically looking at the human wildlife or human wildlands interface. So like how do we create more flow within a city structure and like a wild landscape, and like how do we kind of create more ecological based design within a city or within like an urban development that will bring nature in more so like people like you can like connect more deeply. And yeah, it's this very like this teamwork element that we can bring in, you know, between our development and the earth and like what she needs and her will really too. um so yeah, those are a couple things that I think are really interesting and that have been kind of on my radar in terms of what I feel like my purpose is in this way.
Wow, the ecological design piece is so fascinating to me because, again, it's about, I feel like there's so much that as humanity we've evolved, and I think there's a lot of beauty in that. But it's like, how can we, it's almost like, how can we innovate in a way that's like going back to that reverence of the earth, but not so much to like cavemen days. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
obviously, we're never going to go back to that. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And there's like so much talk about, especially in the spiritual space, there's a lot of talk about going and living like off the grid, and you know, just becoming very self-sustainable. And I don't know, that for me has never sounded super appealing, just because it's like, okay, but isn't that kind of just like rejecting like how far we've come as humans? Like, is that really the way to go? And I'm just speaking from like my personal perspective here. But when you said the ecological design, it's almost like, wow, that sounds like the way to like go into a city or create cities in a way that are like welcoming nature in. It's like, I feel like that's like meeting humanity where we're at, and also like taking us back into nature in a way.
Hmm.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's less of a stretch, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that we have, yeah, we have so many tools. Like the thing that's just coming through is like it's simple. It's so
Mm.
simple. It's so simple, and yeah, it's not, because we have all these things that like we need, you know, like need is like one of those words, relative, but like but it can be more simple, and that can come through in what we in how we design, and like, you know, it the simplicity is going to be key moving forward. And I think that some of these ecological designs I've been looking at, um yeah, they like the word that's coming is like there, it's like an orchestra. There,
Mm.
like all of these pieces are like coming together. It's like orchestrating this symphony experience that we can all have. And yeah, it should be very interesting where that space, which is very up and coming, continues to develop. Like specifically in places like Austin that are so like progressive and forward thinking, I could really see that area kind of like taking off in that direction, to be honest.
Oh yeah, me too. Me
Hmm.
too. So that's really exciting to me. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited that you shared that. So, wow, as we're wrapping up on time, um, is there anything that you feel wants to be said? Anything that you want listeners to really walk away after listening to this? What to walk what you would like them to walk away with? Just any kind of like closing the space. Anything that wants to be said.
Yeah, let me just see. Yeah, there's a few things that I can briefly share. So, one is the authenticity piece that I think sometimes emerges when we connect back to nature. So I just want to float that. You know, if that's something that you want to develop more of, that can really, your connection with nature can really connect you to your own nature, your own like original nature. And this like authenticity piece, I think, can be really, really like that can really expand people. Like that can like be like a supernova of like expansion is like what I'm feeling. Um, when we connect back to that original nature that we have within ourselves and like that authenticity piece. And I think nature can do that for us in some ways. Again, if we allow it and if we have the intention for it too. So yeah, I'll offer that as a closing statement for you if you're listening and you're on the path of evolving in whatever way that looks like to you, and if you want to develop more of this inner connection with self, that could be an avenue for you to pursue.
Wow, that was really beautiful. I needed that.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Well, okay. Thank you so much, Lily. And I'm so excited this is a topic for those listening. We're going to continue bringing this topic in new ways. We really wanted to start with Lily's work, being that she's the co-host of this podcast. And we were like talking about it and we were like, like our listeners don't even know this aspect of her. And so we really wanted to give you guys this insight into Lily's life. And, there's so much that she does kind of, I would say, like behind the scenes in her life and in her work that is contributing to this. And so we really wanted to give you insight into that today. And there is going to be more to come. So thank you, Lily. Thank you, Gaia. And thank you guys for listening. If you have any questions, if there's anything around this topic that you want us to continue to dive into, please let us know, email the show, and we would love to explore that.